Welcome to the Mythinformed podcast. And people sometimes ask, what the heck is the Mythinformed podcast? Who are you guys? What do you do? It says on our Twitter, we're Mythinformed MKE. That is not Mythinformed Mike. Everyone wants to know, who the hell is Mike? Mythinformed Mike is saying this. There is no Mike. There isn't some legendary mystical guy. But the MKE is the Twitter code, or not the Twitter code, the airport code. Like PDX is for Portland, MKE is for Milwaukee. So it's Mythinformed Milwaukee. And what we do is we're a 501c3. We oppose authoritarian ideology to promote and also promote viewpoint diversity. The point is we're trying to limit authoritarian ideology. So we work with a lot of people. We work with local activists, and we're going to talk to Scarlett in a second. But we also mine the internet like crazy for nutty videos. Now, we're not just looking for nutballs on the internet, because there's a lot of crazy people with a lot of crazy opinions, right? So who cares? But when people from Harvard, when people from Stanford, when professors from universities that people pay $250,000 to get degrees from are spouting insane, crazy critical theory and other unfalsifiable ideologies, and this starts to catch on in the popular culture, we care about this. So what we're trying to do is say, hey, the stuff that these crazy people say matters because our institutions matter. And if our institutions get corrupted, the culture and the rest of society gets corrupted. So what we're trying to do is open this up, transparency to the internet, to what's happening on, not specifically social media, but like in the brains of our academics. What's happening in the military? What's happening at the CDC? What are they saying? Are they digesting? Are they spitting out critical race theory or other unfalsifiable ideologies? And if so, we're going to point it out. And that's what we're here to do. And Scarlett, you are our local super mom, and that's what I'm calling it. Scarlett, you have just got a pretty big win.
Yes.
And tell us about the win that you just recently got.
Yes. Victory. This was a very surprising and big win. I still feel sort of like I'm in shock that this happened in the whirlwind that it did. I always believed in the cause, as did all of the parents, particularly a lot of moms that were fighting along with me for the last year. But when we embarked upon a recall of 4 school board members in the Mequon-Thiensville School District, we did so thinking we're going to give this just our best shot. It's very unlikely we'll succeed, but we have to try.
So no, there was an election. So this was a recall election.
This was we're forcing a special election. Yeah. So we started the process of a recall of 4 candidates, not 1, not 2, not 3, 4, and that means we have to get 4,150 signatures per candidate.
So 6,600 signatures in total.
Over
16,000.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we had to get, to recall each one, we have to meet that burden that Wisconsin statutes set.
That's a lot of signatures.
It's a lot. And so whenever someone has to sign, we'd have to say, they'd sign once and try, oh, no, come back. You have to sign a separate sheet, one for each of the 4 school board members that we're attempting to recall. And so I was standing on the street corner for about 60 days now. It got to the point where every day we had a team out. You have to be in a public place, so we would be in front of the Mequon Library pool area. And then we got challenged. We were told by the Mequon mayor we couldn't have our signs up, so people couldn't see us really. And then someone had to physically hold a sign. We couldn't even have a banner taped to our table for the first 30 days until Will, the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, stepped in, and then we filed suit that they were, these were our First Amendment rights, that we had the right to have signs, that signs were in place for other recall efforts, and we won. So
take us back and just a little bit then. So in order to get all these signatures, there's 2 ways to do it. One of them seems door to door, and the other is maybe getting it out on social media, radio, and say, hey, come to a certain place if you want to sign it. We'll have it here.
We did all of the above. We canvassed door to door, but in Mequon, that's very hard. Houses are very far apart. Mm-hmm. It has a rural aspect. A lot of Mequon is rural. and the way the subdivisions are situated. And we realized early on, oh my goodness, this is really going to be hard to do. It can take you 2.5 hours to get halfway through one subdivision. So we decided we're going to set up a table and direct people to that table. Come and sign here, come meet and talk with us. And then so we had to do mailers, we had to knock door to door. We lit thousands of flyers, getting up very early in the morning, wrapping up flyers and putting them in the newspaper box, because this was all self-funded. We pooled all of our own money together, so we had limited resources, so that's what we did. And then people like trickled out, and then we were able to do some text messaging, and at the very end, we paid for that. We were able to do a little bit of that. But really what happened, I think, what started off is everyone was laughing at us at first, at me. I was, frankly, on social media, like there's a couple moms, on the side of the road, holding a sign, and, it kind of seemed like a joke and laughing, like, oh my gosh, what are they doing?
Did you dress up in one of those like Statue of Liberty costumes?
No, yeah, no, but and then we brought our kids because it's summer. Sometimes we just had to bring all of our kids to hold a sign too. But what happened was, I think people started to see our dedication. Yeah. That we weren't, no matter what happened, we were there. We were there holding signs. And then
and what did they say, school board recall?
Yeah. Recall the MTSD school board, restore education, excellence in education. And more people started to say, I want to come and hold a sign too. And so, and just people and then we had friends. We had a lot of retired gentlemen that came as our bodyguards because when people would yell and scream at us like from the window, they would sit there and sort of like, we're going to protect you. And they sat and talked with us. And it just became sort of a community thing. Everyone started to come out and hang out with us at this spot while we're collecting signatures. And word just got out. And it's just interesting because, one person starts something and it can be, like, that's weird. 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 10 people, and suddenly it starts a movement. And we started a movement where we already had a sizable parent group, but I think a lot of people were worried about being so vocal. Yeah. And as we, Amber Schrader is another mom that has been out in the media a lot. And as we became more outspoken and more vocal, and we were able to get on a couple local talk shows and really talk about the issues, the things that were going on in our district. I was able to come on this podcast and talk about what's really happening. That it's not a unicorn. These things are happening in our district.
So what specifically then is it? So it's not like, for example, like the Hawaii football team changing their names from the Rainbow Warriors to just the Rainbows. What were you specifically opposing that you wanted to go all the way to all this effort to do a recall?
Really, that the school board just wasn't listening to us. They wouldn't listen. They wouldn't change. It started obviously with COVID, the COVID shutdown. I've discussed this before. But then our schools turned into juvenile detention centers where kids were walking around holding shields. They couldn't leave the classroom. Teachers were in another room teaching. Even though many teachers wanted to be in the classroom teaching, but they were told, no, you have to be in this room on a screen. So it's technically in person, but it's not. Okay. Kids were depressed about going to school, wearing masks all day, yelled at if they bring it down just a little bit. No, put it up. And so we just grew increasingly frustrated with what schools had become, and we weren't allowed in the building at all. Like parents you couldn't set a toe in the building. So we had to see, then there was a lot of virtual.
So if you had to come pick up your kid early for, I don't know, any reason,
you had to wait
take him
outside.
to the doctor or there was a funeral or something, you had to wait outside?
Yeah, you had to wait outside. Oh my God. Yeah, you couldn't come in the building. So it was a weird year, and things weren't changing as we learned more about the virus and how little effect it had on children, but how detrimental this isolation was for them, how they needed to have a more normal experience. And in our district, you could see a 23% drop in K-5 early reading, drops in math scores, kids not wanting to go to school, drops in student engagement. And we just, it was zero. Here's what our board and many boards across Wisconsin and the country, it's zero COVID. That's their sole focus. We can't have one positive case. Doesn't matter about the suicide rate among teenagers, or the drug use, or the alcohol use, or the depression, or the anxiety, or the kids that can't read, or the kids with autism that can't see faces. It doesn't matter the kids with speech impairments. It doesn't matter that kids leave the building, take off the mask, and go hang out with their friends, or they go play sports, but the minute they're in that building, it's like back to like, this rigid, horrible environment. It just didn't make sense. It was the loss of logic and reason that just continued to frustrate parents, and that our kids were no longer the priority. It was zero COVID. But on top of that, we found out more about, I learned a lot about critical race theory, and I saw it in my school. I saw it in the documents, in the mission statements, the objectives. I see it in the curriculum. I see it in the teacher trainings, like we've discussed Blacksmith, $42,000 to encourage parents to read a socialist manual, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, culturally responsive teaching, social emotional learning, and all of that stuff. So that was another concern. And then that our taxes go up. We spent $55 million on a referendum, and yet the quality of education is going down. And I believe that's more of the district. That's not teachers. That's the district tying the hands of teachers, putting a wall between parents and teachers. And we figured that, we need a new board. We just can't wait. Our kids can't wait. The academic decline is too bad. The depression, anxiety is too bad. We have to do something now. These are our children. And that's when we decided recall was the option.
So part of it's COVID, right? And there's a lot of people on this side of the debate. It kind of cuts through right and left. You can't always tell who's kind of spooked about COVID and who isn't. But what did they say about critical race theory? Did you say, hey, we don't like the stuff, we or consider it racist, or this is anti-American, and they said no? Or like, how did those interactions go?
They said that that critical race theory is not being taught in the schools, which, as I've said, of course it's not being taught in the schools as a class. It is a pedagogy. It is it's a theory that gets put into practice by the educator. It's something that's present in in-service training. It's a obsessive focus on equity. And by equity, it doesn't mean giving kids what they need to succeed, which is what we're often told. It means equitable outcomes.
Yep.
The focus gets and when you focus, to me, with the best way that talking for hours and hours, like to parents on the side of the road, the best analogy that I've had is imagine your high school football team says, you know what, we're no longer going to care about winning. We are only going to care that everyone feels good and everyone has equal playing time and that we have equitable outcomes. Now that team is going to suck, and the players aren't going to they're not going to enjoy the sport anymore, and it's going to devolve into something that they're going to leave, and you're not going to have a football program anymore. And what if you do? It's going to be something no one wants to watch. That's what they've done to education. They've stopped focusing on excellence and providing the best education so that the most children can achieve the greatest heights, and instead they've focused completely on this outcome.
Right.
The outcomes have to be equitable.
So this is a strategy change, right? You might say, and you might think you would get broad agreement on, say, if we can raise the median test score from, 25 to 27, whatever it is, that'd be a goal. Or you could have the goal of reducing the disparities between black, white, et cetera, right? But just reducing the disparities doesn't mean everything's going up. You could actually bring other people down to match that. So
yes.
It's a value judgment.
And in actuality, in our district, we saw African-American kids, their reading proficiency and math proficiency is going down as low as 13% during all of this. So their proficiency is going down. So those who you think you are helping are not getting helped. While it's not as if the scores are going up for certain groups while down for other groups. It's all the scores are sort of going down, but they're all equally mediocre. and they're not getting the quality education that they deserve. And we're not providing services to the kids that are at risk or need those services, the services they need. We're just making them feel better about themselves. But in the end, a good education, a great job, and preparedness for the future, that is the best gift that you could give any child.
That's also a value judgment, right? Like that we believe, and it seems obvious to believe, that schools are there to prepare the kids for the road.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not true. Are schools changing into something else, into a...
They are.
This is to do something else.
They are, and that is the whole thesis behind Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Education is not about educating. It's about helping children to raise their critical consciousness. And that is directly from Marx. That is a part of critical theory.
So Pedagogy of the Oppressed, specifically, you're referring to Paulo Freire's
Paulo
book.
Freire.
Sometime in the 60s, he's a Brazilian educator, happened to be a Marxist.
Mm-hmm.
Some people say he destroyed Brazilian education.
He did.
Other people, that like him might say it. But the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I understand, is a very large book. It's definitely not for kids.
Oh,
right?
no.
This is for educators themselves. And I understand it one piece that this was the #1 selling education book as of last year.
Yeah, and and as I've sat through several teacher trainings, I've had the ability to sign on. I have certificates all summer whenever I was able to, because DPI provides these, and so parents, you can sign on to these.
DPI is the
Department of Instruction for Wisconsin,
okay,
and the State Department of Instruction, and so. I was able to sit in, and they just love it. Oh, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It's you have to read it. It's wonderful. And Kiwiku Ramel Smith told Mequon Thiensville parents, oh, you need to read this book along with White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist. And when I did read it, I had known about that, but I've never thoroughly read it. But when I did, it's the entire thesis of the book is to help use education to raise critical consciousness so that kids are ready to be social justice advocates that will overthrow the system that is oppressing them, the capitalist, Western, bourgeois system, and now they will finally, enter into Shangri-La utopia when they finally can overthrow this oppressive system of capitalism, which is bringing everyone down. And so education's all about getting to that awakening, that moment where you can finally see the truth. And
so education is political activism.
Yeah, it is.
Right? I mean, that's what a PAC does, right?
Yes.
Let's all get together and lobby for higher tax on cigarettes or something.
Yeah, it is. And this is straight from. I just found this article. It's really easy to find in Abstracts Journal articles. Becoming Teachers for Social Justice, Raising Critical Consciousness, and it's all about how, as a teacher, you're not just teaching a subject of math. No, you're creating the next social justice warrior who's going to fight for liberation. The liberating moment.
Yep.
And that way, and yet they claim we're just trying to teach the whole truth. That's what is
but they're
said
teaching
to me.
praxis.
I'm told you're political, and it's the opposite. I want no politics in the classroom. And when in high school, when you're talking about those, when you inevitably have to talk about, obviously, politics because it's part of civics, you do it in a way that is neutral and presents both sides equally and fairly so that students can make their own value judgments.
Right.
But that is not happening. Their value judgments are made for them, and kids are told, and I was told this by many parents, if they even hint that they are conservative or leaning, they've scolded like, you're too young to know what you think. But if they are to the left, they're praised and, oh, how smart you are. You're a genius. You know the truth. It's that is prevalent through our school and many other schools. But no, so they're not teaching critical race theory, but it's coming through the praxis. And as James Lindsay has said, that's the key. Critical race theory is a critical theory, and a critical theory is nothing without the praxis, which means you have to put it into practice. You have to that is your job. It's like your mission statement. It's a very religious zeal to it. And the more that you I could talk about this for a long time, but the more you learn, and this is what I was just talking to a mom who said, the more I learn, the more I see I finally I see the language and, the things that sound good, like critical consciousness and anti-racism, that sounds great, except for it's actually like a verb. It means you have to take action. You have to do the action. You have to do the action of an anti-racist, which is actually the action of the critical consciousness.
So here's an example, like for praxis, specifically for if people aren't seeing this. Like, let's take an apolitical thing, recycling. So you could teach that carbon cycles. You could talk about how the only way to get aluminum out of bauxite is to put it under electricity. It takes an enormous amount of energy, and then it's much easier to melt down aluminum cans than it is to dig them out of the ground, right, and make new aluminum. So recycling aluminum makes sense. That's the theory. Praxis is, hey, let's go out and pick up aluminum cans and make sure they get into the recycle bin and not the garbage.
Exactly.
So what would be an example of praxis that you would see like in the schools for critical race theory?
I think that with like the younger kids, it's to look at everything sort of through the lens of race. Like now it's, as I brought that book Stamped, like let's read the Ibram X. Kendi Stamped. And all of now, even early history that you would teach kids, it would now, like it would reflect more like the 1619 Project. Maybe the reason why the early pilgrims came here was based on slavery, and everything is now viewed through this lens, and that lens makes you sort of distrust the system and the very institutions. And while there's truth, there's some truth in it's not. There's no denying that I would want to teach like the full history. The full history includes a lot of things that get omitted on the other end.
So, like, for example, you could teach early colonial settling. At some point, there were active slaves being transported over. At some point, they stopped the international slave trade in America, but slaves themselves were still legal. So would an example of practice be some movie is being shown, I don't know, about the South or something, and then to say, or a book, and says, tell me the things after you get done reading this book or watching this movie that are wrong with America?
Yes, exactly.
Rather than tell me how you felt about the movie.
So, and I'm looking for some direct text, and it said, this is a good, you challenge students to reflect critically on their beliefs and the sources of those beliefs, using text to guide students to look outwards and discover perspectives and challenge others, selecting text purposefully to heighten student awareness of issues of power and equity, teaching students to read text critically, listening carefully for the points of view of others often ignored or silenced, creating space for dialogue, and finally making the world their classroom, blurring the boundary between schools and communities. Students research the world and take steps toward change in ways that recognize or revalue our common humanity.
Change.
It's social justice. I mean,
right. Why couldn't something might not need to be changed? Does everything need to be changed?
Everything needs to be
wrong?
changed. So you look at everything in a different way, and when it's looking critically, it's never looking critically at Ibram X. Kendi. It's never thinking about the 1619 Project critically. Could there be a different motive behind what's written? Should we carefully examine the claims made in the 1619 Project, because there are several liberal professors that say no, this is not true, and to say that that the 1776 Declaration of Independence was all about keeping slavery,
keeping slaves, yeah.
Which
that was the central claim that Nicole Hannah-Jones made.
And
she walked it back later.
Yes, because as we know, slavery was still alive and well all throughout Europe and all throughout the English, in England, and that's not what it was about. But to again now let's look critically at the 1776, Declaration and the Revolutionary War, and see it as a fight for, slavery, a fight.
Are you seeing the 1619 Project specifically in schools? I would think that was directed more towards high schoolers than at higher reading level.
No, I think it's being implemented through kids don't use textbooks anymore. They use supplemental materials, And I think the supplemental materials brought in through the teachers, through the curriculum, through what's advised to them by the curriculum directors. When you go, a lot of it comes right from DPI. There's a lot of...
Do they do other NGOs, like these other nonprofits that
Yes.
There's a ton of social justice nonprofits.
Yes.
Nothing against nonprofits. We're a nonprofit as well.
Yes.
But are they making these materials
Yes,
then that
they
they
are.
can sell to DPI?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And also directly, and ESSER funds are able to be used to purchase these curriculums. And then
Are those taxpayer funds? What are
yeah,
ACER?
those are the funds that were provided to school districts during COVID to help relieve the expenses related to all the to as a buffer. And there's tons of money. I mean, there's so much money being thrown at schools right now, and so teachers and
So DEI is
districts,
getting in on this.
yeah. Oh, yeah. And so the districts are able to use ESSER funds to buy curriculums, and then teachers are being gifted curriculums by those NGOs and by nonprofits. They're gifted through United Way. A lot of organizations will gift them a whole, what I would say is a critical race theory, a lot of the kids' books like A is for Activists, Woke Baby, Ibram Kendi has several children's books. There's a whole, if you go on Amazon, you'll see there's a plethora of these books that are, it's kind of crazy when you read them. I've been trying to order some and get them used to add to show parents what they look like. And the average parent who just off the street doesn't know very much, when they see these books, they're just, no.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Can't be
and
it.
we're gonna show some examples coming up in a little bit of what pieces of praxis that we found out, that aren't specifically related to Mequon School District, but overall and how this is affecting the wider world. What are parents saying? And there might be some that are already like us, that they're going in that are skeptical of critical race theory, but I'm more interested in the normies, so to speak. What are they saying that have come in and signed the petition?
I think a lot of the regular parents are a little confused. This is new to them, and it takes a lot of research to sort of understand, and you really have to, to point things out, because everyone wants, when you trust, you put your kids in the schools, you trust your community, and I think for the most part, there's a lot of very good motives, but this in our district, it isn't overt. It isn't like like it said, critical race theory 101. It's just, I just talked to someone today who said that when they had been inside of our schools, they were shocked at how politicized things had become. It was shocking to them.
What, like BLM flags, trans flags? What are they saying?
No, not in that overt way. It's more just in middle schools and in high schools, the overt way that kids were being led, that only an adult sometimes can see, reading an article and thinking that's not objective at all. That has an agenda. And just this person had witnessed it was sickening to this person, the amount of agenda that's in the classroom. The kids don't necessarily even understand enough to relate back to their parents unless you've sort of really had serious talks with your kids, and I think a lot of parents are now, and you should. But in our...
It's kind of like that Pizza Hut video that we had. Remember when she was asking for examples, like what is structural racism? And then these 11-year-olds, these adorable 10 and 11-year-olds would come up and be like, is when a power differential that black people don't have power and white people do.
Yeah.
That does not occur to a 10 or 11-year-old. That's been put there. I mean, are you seeing stuff like that?
I'm not sure as much as higher order as that, but what I know for sure, what I can say for sure that I'm seeing is a sharp decline in education and a sharp drop in AP education for accelerated learners, and that our kids are not getting the education that they did 6 to 10 years ago. So that is something that's very real, that the education decline is real, and it's because we are so focused on all of this other stuff that we're neglecting the core principles, the things that they really need in order to excel. And we're more focused on their critical consciousness and their belief, the ideology, and all of this stuff that
And
really
a critical consciousness is just, okay, point out something that's wrong. For example, like even in a movie, you can have amazing movies with amazing, but again, they're people are complex.
Yeah.
Maybe the hero of the story that saves the day is actually kind of an asshole or something.
Yeah, and it's just it's this focus to get kids to think of the world politically, everything politically, and we as adults see it that how everything's become political. That you can't just sit back and enjoy yourself. You have to be lectured to in some way. Something has to come back to.
There is no neutral. You're either racist or anti-racist. There is no not racist.
The jokes have to be censored. The cancel culture. This is obviously in the classrooms too, and it's resulting in academic decline. And overall, in America, we're 26th in the world. So that's what we can see, and that's what parents see, and that's what I learned. Like being out among parents and grandparents. I've learned that they see it too. I can see something that I can't put my finger on. Things are not the same. And the great thing about what happened, I'll circle back to our experience and the good news. The good news is that they've gone too far. And then a lot of those who opposed the recall were posting, "Run them off the road." They were so mean and so vile and so vicious that the normal people, the normies, looked around and said, "No, that's not fair. These are parents that have legitimate concerns." And
this is civics in action.
Yeah, they have a right to be there. In the way and being denied service at Starbucks, that was another story. That we had some recall organizers out front, and they were on a public area in front of a Starbucks, like at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
And someone came in and wanted to get them coffee.
They wouldn't serve them?
No, they wouldn't serve them.
Wow, what did they say?
They said they didn't want to get involved in the politics and serve them.
But you are by changing your paradigm.
Yeah, so that became a big story in the community, and
wow.
Yeah, and people were upset about that, and then they learned it's very hard on a shoestring budget to get the message out. We're doing a recall, and here's why. But once we did, at the end, I have to say it was like a George Bailey, It's a Wonderful Life moment. The last week and the last 4 days in particular, people just were lining up to sign. Awesome. They were bringing petitions. They said, "Can I have an extra petition? I'm going to go have my grandma sign and my dad sign." They all live in the district. We had teenagers line up and sign.
Did you reach in your pipe and pull Zuzu's paddles?
Yeah, yes, that's how I felt. I cried. When we knew that we were going to reach our goal, we all started crying and hugging. And then the next day, our final day, we were able to get above. So we were able to get
more than 1,000.
More than the 4,150.
16,000, really.
Yeah, we were able to get about 4,482 per candidate. And we just...
It's incredible.
It was incredible.
And when's the vote then? So this is a recall election.
Now all these signatures are going through a certification of sufficiency process by a current school board member that, oddly enough, is the one that will go through all of the signatures. It seems like a conflict of interest, but that's the way it's set up.
But assuming that goes through without a hitch.
That goes through without a hitch, which it should. We vetted the signatures. We had... When we saw something inaccurate...
ID's racist, right? I forgot to tell you.
Oh, it's funny. Everyone came up that is obviously look more conservative. Like, do you need my ID? So we vetted, and when we saw something that didn't look right, we would find the person and try and get them, "Here, you need to fix this." And so we were very careful. So we feel very confident. But now there's 31 days from last week that they have 31 days, and then once they certify, then an election date is set.
Okay,
for
it'll be a special election.
It'll be a
won't
special
be
election.
On the normal. Okay.
A special election. Each recalled school board member will have their own election. They should all be on the same day. There could be a primary if there's a few little hitches, but this should happen within the next 2 months.
Okay. and I'm sure that you'll post this. You'll probably
Yes.
pin this to your Twitter
Yes.
at Sky Johnson 4.
Yes, now we're moving into a campaign mode. You know, now we have to shift gears. We take a little break and now move into campaign mode and now get for candidates and run and try and take back our school board and now do the real work of change to restore academic excellence and bring our schools back to just a place where there are political free zones. We're just going to focus on our kids and giving them the best education that we can, and we're just going to kind of get rid of all the anything that looks like critical race theory. Kind of get rid of that.
And if anyone's watching who is either a super mom or a super dad or just a super community member that is interested in doing this, Scarlett is a great reference. You can contact us or her directly, and we'll get you in touch with her. And this just doesn't happen, and she's an expert at organizing this.
Well, I guess a little no, but it can be done. That's the message.
I've went to 3 of your events, and that was not all of them.
Thank you. But it can be done. And one good quote is, if they tell you it can't be done, it's usually because it hasn't been tried. So it can be done. You can do the impossible, and you'll be surprised when you reach out and you stick your neck out and you do something because you really believe it and you're authentic and your passion is true. My passion for my children and other children is authentic. People see that and they will come.
Yeah.
They will be there for you. Your community will support you. So do it.
Yeah, because
Make
this is not about Republican, Democrat. This isn't red good, blue bad. This is critical race theory ideas. I think are toxic.
Yeah.
My opinion's known on this. I think yours is too.
Yeah.
And just saying, are we sure we want this? Because I'm confident that the people in the middle are with us. Otherwise, they wouldn't be denying that it was critical race theory in the first place. They'd be, no, critical race theory is this wonderful thing.
Yeah, and we all don't want to live in times like these. Like Samwise Gamgee told Frodo, none of us want to live in these turbulent times.
Yeah.
We want to live in the better times. But when we are in these times that can seem kind of dark, our goal is we have to fight through them, and we have to be the heroes. You have to become a hero yourself. And when you do something that everyone tells you can't be done, I can't tell you how amazing it feels. It feels so good because we've had so many losses, so many battles over the last year with the school board, and we've lost every single one. Okay, there's not been a single win, because we have a 6-1 school board that just doesn't listen to us. It used to be 7-0, but to have this win, this first win, it feels like just so great. It's just such a victory for grassroots organizers, for moms everywhere, for dads, for grandparents, for all the people that believed in us and stood with us and signed the petition, even though there's pressure not to sign. So I'm grateful to everyone who stood with us.
Yeah, and
forever
if you can't
grateful.
be an activist too, and you've mentioned talk to your kids. In the chat, they're saying the same thing. Also, parents, talk to your kids. That it will certainly
kids.
have somewhat of an immunizing effect
It does.
On this, right? This has nothing to do with COVID, by the way, for the censors out there. So, Sean, I wanna pop up some articles that you have not seen. These are going to be videos. These are kind of our more popular ones for the week that we found. Charlotte, I want you to, Scarlett, did I say Charlotte? I want you to take a look and see if they ring any bells or what they think. So we're going to pitch curveballs at you.
Whiteness is like something that white clients are, really split off from often, and that it comes back as a ghost and kind of interferes with psychotherapeutic work, interferes with symbolization, with mourning, and then this disavowal from the identification of whiteness leads to a creation of the self that cuts one off from like empathetic identification from people who are different in some way, and then at the same time drains off sort of the psychic energy of the person, of the white person. And I think that that's like an incredibly valuable conceptualization that I think immediately kind of encapsulates something that can be very useful as a way of thinking about the things that you see with white clients, including like these very typical presentations in private practice: anxiety, depression, social isolation, isolation within relationships. Like these things, I think, are often, you can be, depending on the situation, can be conceived as not just about whiteness, but not helped by whiteness, exacerbated by whiteness. And
so that is New York City clinical psychologist Natasha Stovall suggesting whiteness is a ghost and it drains white people's psychic energy.
What is whiteness? What is whiteness to her? What is that?
So there are people try to steal it, and that whiteness and white people seem to often be fungible. But they'll claim that whiteness is actually closer to American culture. So they'll say we need to de-white, like be less white. What they're trying to say is you need to act less white. So the culture that you're swimming in is white. So you could be a white person that doesn't act white. They never say exactly what that is.
Yeah, what is it? Is it Western civilization?
It's all those things. Remember, like striving for excellence, being on time. Those kind of things are all considered this white supremacy culture. So
exactly.
I guess if you're super chill, I don't know. Like I'm trying to think of people who don't do this. But even like John Lennon, right? Take the true artist type. Like, I bet you those guys work their ass off.
Yes.
I just don't think that they sit around and just come up with cool songs.
No, she doesn't. When I say that, it's kind of facetiously. Does she even know what whiteness is? Whiteness becomes this all-encompassing term for whatever they don't like. It's whiteness.
Of
and
American
it's
culture.
Of American culture, European culture, Western civilization. It's whiteness. It's whiteness. And it's very racist.
Right.
It's extremely
and it also
racist.
gets the thing up because you got to expect, now they try to do this distinction, right? But like, who's going to be doing this? Most people are going to say white and white, but it's the same. In the same way as if somebody was criticizing blackness.
Yeah.
It's going to sound awfully racist.
Yes, it does. If you were to use that term for any other nationality or race, it would sound,
right.
It's
so that I think that's critical race theory into psychology.
Yes, it is.
So
yes,
that
it is.
outside of school, so it's not just in the schools. Sean, we got the other one? I think is that the Duquesne University? Do you have? Huh? Okay, we can do that one too.
States that Admiral Kendi's book states that capitalism is essentially racist.
Admiral, your microphone isn't on, I believe.
Thank you. Kendi's book states that capitalism is essentially racist. And Kendi is clear that racism must be eliminated. So yes or no? Do you personally consider advocating for the destruction of American capitalism to be extremist?
Here's what I know, Congressman.
So yes
There's
or no
racism
question,
in the United States Navy.
Admiral, you
I
recommended
have an
every
obligation.
sailor in the United States Navy read this book. So yes or no question.
I'm not forcing anybody to read the book. It's on a recommended reading list.
Admiral, did you read the book?
I did.
Okay. In college, Kendi stated that white people are a different breed of humans and are responsible for the AIDS virus. Yes or no, do you personally consider the conspiracy that white people started AIDS to be an extremist belief?
Sir, I'd have to understand the context.
That is a
These
simple
statements
question.
Are made. I'm not going to.
Admiral, this is a book that you recommended every sailor in the United States Navy read.
Cherry-picked quotes from somebody's book. I'm not going to do that. This is a bigger issue than Kendi's book. What this is really about is trying to paint the United States military, and in this case, the United States Navy is weak, as woke. And we've had sailors that spent 341 days at sea last year with minimal port visits, the longest deployments we've
Admiral,
had.
I've met you. I respect
you. We are
you.
not weak.
I remain
We are
astonished.
strong, and our parents
Admiral, I remain
and their
astonished that you
parents
put this book on a reading list and recommended that every sailor in the United States Navy read it. I'm also surprised that you said you read it. It's that.
Wow.
Based Jim Banks, who is a congressman from Northeast Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
He's also been in the military, so he doesn't skimp at pushing back at the brass.
Yes,
What do you think?
Yes. I think I'm really shocked by, that's a quote I haven't heard about white and starting the AIDS virus. And I'm reminded of, Hannah Arendt and the othering that's going on. And that's what really scares me. The first clip, the whiteness, and now this clip where he's quoting Ibram X. Kendi. It's that white are now this being white and whiteness. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're white. That's what I was trying to say. I think it's your brand of white. If you can get out of it, if you believe what they believe, then you have a little protection. Whiteness is, not only do you have white skin, because Candace Owens is white adjacent.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm white. according to them, I'm guilty of whiteness because I love America.
Yep.
I love American values, and I think the Western civilization is an amazing thing that we should preserve. So I am acting white. I am perpetuating whiteness. So it is anyone who disagrees with their radical version of what the world should look like is participating in whiteness, and those are the others,
Yep.
and they are evil. They spread virus like AIDS. Or they're diseased. They're bad. It's the theme that I'm seeing is really scary. It's very scary that this othering is sort of happening, and if it happens young, I mean, what did Vladimir Lenin say? Give me 5 years give me your children for 5 years, and they're mine forever. I will forever. Like, there's a better way of saying that, but you
he
start
also
this
mentioned,
young.
right, that as the hardships increase, the greater chance that the proletariat will see the situation and then want to join us. So
Yes.
it's not always bettering society, making things easier for people, but rather doing what's ever easiest for the political aims that they want.
Yeah.
That's not education. That's politics. That is what they call
Indoctrination.
politicking.
Well, the quote is, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." That's Vladimir
4
Lenin.
years.
4 years to
Okay.
teach children, and the seed, you start young enough, and that's why they're going after our children.
Yep.
They really are. But this is, and then in the military, then you see what's happening in Afghanistan, and you can't help but think, this is the Biden military, and it preceded a lot of this stuff. Has been, it goes back several years. This sort of politicalization of the military, the wokeness of the military. I think this is probably mostly in the officer class, not with, but I have a lot of experience with the military. My dad, a military man. I was a Navy wife for a lot of years, and the military vets and their families were just, they love America. They are the bravest, most wonderful people I've ever known. And I think that they think that that clip, they're not on board.
What's a shame to me is when I look at the military history, like Truman won in 52 because he was going to integrate the military. That picked up a considerable amount of black vote to want to do this. So the military has, when the left says, but the military has been used for social justice purposes. Yes, that's true. Integration reduced racism.
It did.
Right? World War
It
II
did.
reduced racism when all these people, again, white people fighting in the front lines, but black people were getting their ammo,
Yeah.
getting them out of there with ambulances. You don't think this took a toll on, are we really that different? This guy just risked his ass for me. So I like it when the military is reducing racism. I'm just afraid this is going to push it the other way.
Military bases are the most diverse places you'll ever see. Diversity of religion, diversity of there's people that live from all over the world, all different parts of the world, speak different languages. And it's extremely diverse and tolerant, and it's amazing. And I reflected on that, years ago, how wonderful it was to be part of the military, because you didn't care about color of skin or national origin or religion. You were around so many different kinds of people. You traveled the world, and you live in different cultures, and it makes you a very well-rounded person.
Yeah.
So I really struggle with why they, other than for political reasons.
Yep, and this, I guess, the reason why why we show it is they'll say, okay, yeah, kids often don't pay that much attention in school. Who's care once they get into the real world? This ship will go, or this will go away. It'll be a non-issue. But what we're finding is no, this is actually transforming.
Oh yeah.
The pieces. That's why we're bringing it up. Sean, what do we have next?
He made the assertion that white people should commit suicide as an ethical act. And here's a quote from him directly. "The reality in South Africa today is that most white people spend their whole lives only engaging Black South Africans in subservient positions. My question is then, how can a person not be racist if that's the way they live their lives? The only way then for white people to become part of Africa is not to exist as white people anymore. If the goal is to dismantle white supremacy, and white supremacy is white culture, then the goal has to be to dismantle white culture and ultimately white people themselves. the total integration into Africa by white people will also automatically then mean the death of white people as white as a concept would not exist anymore. So here's the kind of crazy gambit of this talk. I want to suggest that psychoanalytically, we could even make the argument that there was something ethical in Delport's statements. Now, I suppose, parenthetically, we could say that Delport's kind of a young, fired-up academic, and maybe, there's a little bit too much of a dramatization in some of his comments. But nevertheless, I want to make the argument that there is some kind of ethical dimension to his provocations. I think that Delport took his white audience to the threshold of a type of symbolic extinction, or at least the contemplation of what that might be. He took them to a proposed end of whiteness. Or, in more psychoanalytic terms, we could say that Delport offered his white audience the opportunity, one they didn't seem to appreciate for the most part, but the opportunity to contemplate what we could call the castration of whiteness.
Right. So
That just
Delport
proves the
is
point, what we were discussing.
yeah. So his assertion was white people should commit suicide as an ethical act. So this is his defense of that statement.
Yes. And white as a concept. Again.
Right. White
and
people.
he's-
Remember what we
he's
were talking
walking
about?
that back. Yeah, he's walking that back. Well, I didn't actually mean suicide. I mean, death of the white as a concept. Death to your. So what is that?
Yeah.
And that is. What
does that mean?
Individual. I believe it's like Audre Lorde. You can't rebuild the master's house with the master's tools. It means the end of capitalism, the end of individualism. You think as a collective mind hive, and you like all the Judeo-Christian values gone. Like there's no religion, there's only the state.
Well, I mean, what
Everything
would
for
it be?
the
Well, you
state.
came over here before the podcast, right? What if I would have said, Scarlett, great to see you. You can definitely come in, just don't act Latina.
I know.
That,
And what does that?
that would be,
Yeah,
I mean, you would be
offensive.
within your
It would be
rights to
offensive.
flip me off and leave.
Yes.
Like, because that's just exceedingly rude. And what the hell does it mean?
What does
it's
it
the
mean
same
to
thing
act
if you're
white? What does it mean to act white? What is white as a concept? So these are the things to be practical. When you hear something like this, ask them. What do you mean when you say white as a concept? What do you mean by acting white? What does whiteness mean to you? Make them define. Andrew Breitbart
Right.
has said that. Make them define their concepts because they will often dig their own graves.
But
as
they'll
they
say,
do.
like, the white supremacy culture. I've even seen one
What-
where
what
we
is
got into
that?
a Twitter argument, and they'll said, whiteness it's too formal. There's a formality about it.
So you don't know what it is. What I'd say.
Right. But then
If
that
you can't
suggests
define
that
it.
no other cultures have formality.
Yeah, no. It's just like Ibram X. Kendi defining racism as racism. Well, racism is racism. You actually don't have a clear definition
Kendi flips it.
because what it is whatever you don't like.
It's whatever you don't like.
And
Right.
whisper
Now,
it just
and
like Joe
imagine, too,
Biden.
and-
It's
and
what
I
you
got it.
don't like.
I got into an argument on Twitter saying that this is genocidal rhetoric.
It
Now,
is.
and
It
are they
that's-
directly calling? Well, because it's a metaphysical.
No,
suicide.
it's genocidal.
Is this genocidal rhetoric?
That's why I mentioned
Yes.
Hannah Arendt.
That would-
Origins of Totalitarianism. This is genocidal
Yes.
rhetoric.
And they would say too, it's the Jewishness, right, versus the
Yes.
It's no better when you say Jewishness versus
Yes.
Jews.
Yeah.
And again, the rhetoric itself isn't enough to enact a genocide. However, it is a necessary component of a genocide. So when these things are happening, like I just couldn't believe that people were defending, like not many, but a few on Twitter, like, well, you didn't say that he said they wanted to integrate them into Africa.
Yeah, they try and make it into a higher order. Well, it didn't really mean
Mm-hmm.
it meant death of the white concept, the death of, and
Yeah.
again, what is that? The death of capitalism,
Sure.
the death of, and basically, all of the property, you redistribute it. That's
Mm-hmm.
what it means that you shouldn't, redistribute it back, whether it's to try and find the original like Native American tribe, which that would be considering all the wars over like the various lands by various Native American tribes. Who was the original? I mean,
Yeah, who was the original
Who is the
owner?
original? It's basically that you should just surrender your property, surrender your income, surrender your
Or your
s-
personality or whatever. It
everything
doesn't
about
matter.
you
You're
to
white.
to us, and we will remake you.
Yeah, we'll remake you.
Which sounds again, that isn't that a Bible verse? Like God will be remade in His image, except for well in the New Testament, God loving remade into this loving image. the image that they would like us to be remade into doesn't sound so great.
Yeah.
But again, it's
But there
these
were Jewish
religious
collaborators
concepts.
with the Nazis.
Yeah,
and
there
called,
were.
They called them capos, right?
Yeah.
Which is a pretty offensive word. And they treat you a little bit better if you'd go along with the program. It seems like
But
that's
in the
what
end,
this is.
in
They'll
the end,
treat you a little bit better if you
yeah.
reject your whiteness.
They will, but in the end, you end up. It's in the same.
It's the same
but
thing.
but there's
You've got
so
an
many
angry
people
mob.
of color that just do not go along with this. In the Hispanic community, this is not. There's maybe joke like you're acting white. That could be a joke. Something that is said among Latina community. If there's something fun, dancing white,
Yeah,
kind
sure.
of like you don't know
Yeah.
how to dance.
You dance like a white girl. That's
yeah.
not that offensive.
Yeah, but so that is something. But this rhetoric is not it's not something that's cheered in the Hispanic community. And if you could see, like with Gavin Newsom, like 51% of Hispanics are supportive of his recall, and the increasingly Hispanics are coming over to be more conservative because the alignment of values. And so I think that there are a lot of people of color that absolutely reject this. This is too far, and so I wouldn't even say that. It's usually white people that say these kind of more extreme things. It is. There are a few maybe Black liberation, very radical, and in the Hispanic, there's some Latina. Chicana liberation movements back in the 70s that were very radical. But
And I'm sure we could find a Black Hebrew Israelite that's awfully racist, right? But the thing is, the reason why we're not going to pick on the Black Hebrew Israelites is generally they don't have a ton of political power.
Yeah,
I don't see them ascended, so they can speak, they can say whatever they want. There are alt-right, legit white nationalists out there that say a lot of odious things. They are also, they don't have
But they
that
don't have
same
power.
Right.
That's what Christopher
This is
Rufo
a
has
person
said.
from a university.
That's
right?
what Christopher Rufo has said. Yes, there are a very small amount of actual white supremacists. They have no power. No one, when they spout their evil rhetoric, everyone runs from them. No one wants to be a part of their organizations. They have no institutional power whatsoever. We all abhor them. Yet this is racist. This is genocidal rhetoric, and yet
but you can't be genocidal against the majority. They say.
Yes,
even though that 6% of people are white in the world.
We
right?
have
So that's a
to
distinct
reject
minority.
Well, why is the California Ethnic Studies curriculum they won't even have Martin Luther King in their curriculum of great Black leaders because he's not woke enough for them. He's not radical enough. There was I sat through a lecture where the California Ethnic Studies curriculum that's trying to get passed, when they
this
have
is a proposed curriculum.
A proposed curriculum, and then it's also the same. It's in Oregon and in New York. They have like 130 or so leaders of color that should be admired. And Martin Luther King is not one of them. And actually, one of his speechwriters wrote a letter saying that this curriculum is so abhorrent that he worries about the fate of this country and children in it with this sort of radical that rejects the idea of Martin Luther King. They reject it. He's not radical enough. A colorblind is racist because you should see color.
That's what they say. Yeah.
Being anti-racist is to see color and to actively do things. Like you need reverse discrimination to fight
that's kind of
past
you
discrimination.
Fight past discrimination with present and future discrimination. Yeah, somebody in the chat said I could see you looking at the chat. I'm like, yeah, because we're trying to interact with it. So that's intentional. I hope you see that. So yeah, this seems to be everywhere. And I guess the last thing I just want to say is somebody in the chat also mentioned, you got informed by myths, so Mythinformed. So the point is, we want to look at some of these situations through the lens of a narrative myth, right? And you can see a ton of them. America was founded in 1619 with the importation of the first African slave. The school-to-prison pipeline, right? That police were formed as actually slave patrols. None of this stuff is true. All of it has the tiniest kernel
Yes.
of truth, but it's being pushed as the truth. And what I'm
Melanin theory.
concerned is we're informed by myth. Now, is it critical theory? But there's a new mythos that's developing because, again, Foucault isn't as easy to remember and doesn't sound like defund the police.
Yeah.
Right? Those are narrative myths, and we're swimming in them right now.
We change language. We change the meaning of words. We change language, and at a young age, if we indoctrinate kids young enough, they'll be fish that don't know they're wet. They won't even. I mean, Orwell spent his last years talking about this. That if we continue down the path, he really was a prophet. He saw what would happen. The more that we change words, the more that we twist and torture logic. That's what really drives people crazy.
It does.
And that you're watching obvious things that are obviously, they make no sense. What we watched, it doesn't make any sense.
The biggest Orwell piece that I see is, in Orwell specifically, because remember how there was 3 countries, Oceania, East Asia, and Eurasia?
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, Oceania and Eurasia were with East Asia. But then it shifted, and now Eurasia and East Asia were at war with Oceania. And the history books didn't say, no, this doesn't change. We've always been at war with Oceania, right?
Yes.
And the parallel that I see is dead naming, right? Caitlyn Jenner isn't just Bruce Jenner now transitioning and living his life as a woman. But no, Bruce Jenner was actually Caitlyn Jenner won the decathlon back in 78 or whenever the heck that was.
Yes. Even many instances with COVID, we said one thing. No, we never said that.
He's always been Caitlyn Jenner.
Yeah. The same day they will say one thing about COVID and then 10 hours later another thing, and it's like, no, we never, this was always the truth. The other, that wasn't the truth now. And that's where there's so much distrust. And you don't, when people don't know who to trust and when they can't trust their government and when they can't trust, their school districts and their leaders, it leaves a big hole that in the community and in the country. And, we need to get back to reason and logic and knowable things. And people are desperate for that. They're desperate to have things make sense again. They've lost, the sense-making mechanisms aren't there anymore.
They're not there. And that's going to lead people down into conspiracy theories
and
other narratives.
It is. But it is. But when, it's...
There's such thing as Blue Anon. There is a QAnon, and there's a Blue Anon as well.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt. So the other thing that I did not mention that we do is have conferences. And we've had a number of conferences. We have 1 or 2 a year. They tend to be regional, but you do get a certain national pull. We've had them in Milwaukee. We've had them in Philadelphia. And now we're going to Fort Worth, Texas for our next one. That's November 6th, 2021 in Fort Worth, Texas. These things are a lot of fun. If you've never been to one, they're a blast because it's not like you're sitting in the seats and watch people on stage. You interact with everybody, like every single speaker. And yes, I know that I'm part of the event, so I have a little bit more access. But every member, any paying attendee, could have talked to any of these people at length. And that's the cool part is somebody came up to them, they're like, "Oh my God, that was the best thing. I just was talking to Jack Posobiec for an hour, or I was talking to Sydney Watson for an hour at the bar afterwards." So it's a lot of fun. It's not just this sit down. The whole thing's interactive. It's a blast. And we're not just inviting people from the right. We invite people from the left because, again, it's a lot easier to know if you're making sense when you've got a defense. Yeah. So you have to have somebody that's passionately maybe opposed you or slightly disagrees with you at a minimum to really keep you honest.
Yeah.
And I really like that aspect of it. So and the ticket prices were super high in the past, but we've lowered them at $125 is a bargain. You get the whole day.
Wow.
And you get to hang out. It's a lot of fun if you haven't been.
To
there is an online stream, and if it's impossible to come, you should definitely check that out because it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm excited.
But it's definitely worth coming.
It'll be a lot of fun.
And we'll do some more of this. And I want to talk a little bit more too on our next one about some of these myth narratives, and they're getting wrapped up into the political.
Oh, that would be
And,
interesting.
You know, there was another one that we didn't have time to get to, but it's comparing January 6th to an insurrection where 50 freedmen in Louisiana, there's a thing called the Colfax Massacre. In 1873, after a post-election, black freedmen, meaning ex-slaves, took over portion of like the governor's mansion, or at least some political standpoint to stop the election, because they believed that it was fraudulent. They were rounded up, but then at some point when they were captured, 50 of them were summarily executed. And the woman who wrote White Rage, Carol Anderson, was being interviewed, and she goes, yeah, this has a lot of parallels with January 6th. That's BS. That is narrative myth. They're weaving a narrative myth, something that's actually real in history, and now weaving this into the future. That's the narrative myth. It's not that the Colfax Massacre didn't happen. It's that January 6th has zero to do with Colfax Massacre.
And you know this because you actually have a foundation of with history and critical thinking, real critical thinking. So you're able to decipher when you hear something that doesn't make sense. Again, your sense-making, logic, reason, your background knowledge. When you deprive children of that, they will start to believe anything. Now, because they lack all of that background historical knowledge, then they don't have the critical thinking skills to actually like, hey, that doesn't make sense, or to challenge, a thinker, to challenge what you can only, because you can't challenge anything other than one type. You can only challenge anything that would be center right. You cannot challenge anything center right.
Yeah, it's really hard. Yeah, you have to be able to speak your mind.
So yeah, you have to. Free speech is fundamental. Without free speech, we do not have a free society. We do not have liberty. And because free speech, freedom of thought, it's getting to the point now where we're getting into think crime territory.
We are.
Yeah,
we are.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, the last piece I'd add to that is Facebook's policy about COVID-19. Specifically say you can't put misinformation. So if you try to say that COVID doesn't exist or something, then you'll get knocked out. You could debate that. But now they're saying, even if you posted something like, my child had some negative reaction to the vaccine, even if it's wholly true, and you just put up a factual statement, because it might discourage others from taking the vaccine, therefore it's negative.
And it's not in the public good.
That's thought control.
It's not in the public good. It's not in the good of the state. The state needs to determine these things. You don't have the right to make these decisions for yourself, or even to put your opinion out there.
Yep. That narrative myth weaving in there, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that next time.
We can't give the state this much power.
No,
we just can't.
Because otherwise, we will.
One day it will be.
We'll be informed by new
one day they're
that
coming
you
for you.
Question.
One day they're coming for you.
Yep.
That's
fundamentals of religion. It's essentially what that is. So, thanks everyone for watching. We'll get you back next week. Definitely stop by the Better Discourse 3 website if you are interested in tickets to Dallas Fort Worth. It's going to be awesome. Thanks everyone.
Bye.